The exact nature of relationship between the Glagolitic and the Cyrillic scripts has been historically a matter of great controversy and dispute in Slavic studies, especially pertaining to the question of chronological precedence and mutual influence. Several traditional accounts on the origin of the Slavic script they describe are ambiguous in the statements of what particular script they pertain to, which is furthermore complicated by the occasional mixture of terms used for them in some sources. Question of precedence. The theory of chronological precedence of Glagolitic script with regard to Cyrillic has been first put forth by G. Dobner in 1785, but ever since Pavel Joseph Safarik's 1857 study of Glagolitic monuments über den Ursprung und die Heimat des Glagolitismus there has been a virtual consensus in the academic circles that the Glagolitic was the script Constantine devised, rather than Cyrillic. This view is supported by numerous linguistic, paleographic and historical accounts. The reason why Greek-derived Cyrillic script spread so quickly in the lands of Slavia Orthodoxa is because it had the benefit of replacing an alphabet that was specifically designed to fit the sound system of Slavic speech. This leads to the conclusion that Cyrillic was but a mere transliteration of older Glagolitic alphabet. As a comparison, Slavic lands using the Latin alphabet took a long time to adapt to Roman alphabet systematically for the local needs, inventing special digraphs and diacritics for Slavic phonemes only with the advent of printing in the 16th century. Glagolitic monuments are significantly smaller in number, which suggests that the writing tradition which introduced them was subsequently replaced by a younger tradition, more vigorous and voluminous in output. Generally, Glagolitic monuments of the Old Church Slavonic canon are older than the Cyrillic counterparts. The most archaic features of OCS canon monuments are generally much more frequent in Glagolitic than in Cyrillic part of the canon. The evidence of pre-Moravian mission phonetics Glagolitic alphabet was devised for and which it indirectly reflects, characteristic of the phonological system of a South Slavic Macedonian dialect in a specific time frame of the late 9th century, the Der, Saint and Dizelo, and which are present in Glagolitic monuments either exclusively or predominantly, further corroborates their antiquity over Cyrillic in which these sounds are absent or changed by means of sound changes assumed to have occurred in the later period. Of surviving Church Slavonic palimpsests, the tendency has been to write Glagolitic over Glagolitic, Cyrillic over Glagolitic, Cyrillic over Cyrillic, but never Glagolitic over Cyrillic. All extant palimpsests are written in Cyrillic, and modern photographic analysis has shown a previous layer of Glagolitic letters. Some Cyrillic monuments of the canon contain occasional Glagolitic letters, words, or even sentences, all written by the hand of the same scribe. Adversely, Cyrillic words or letters found in the Glagolitic monuments are provably later additions. Cyrillic glosses are present in Glagolitic MSS, but not the other way around. Some scribal errors in Cyrillic monuments indicate that the Cyrillic MS has been copied from Glagolitic original. For example, in Savar's book one can find a form instead of. If we assume that the text has been copied from the Glagolitic template, the scribal error becomes much more clear. Is written in Glagolitic as one is written as. Similarity of Glagolitic graphemes and has caused an obvious spelling mistake. The numerical value of Glagolitic letters is an orderly progression in agreement with the sequence of letters in the alphabet. On the other hand, the Cyrillic script simply follows the Greek numerical usage and does not assign numerical values at all to certain non-Greek letters. Moreover, Cyrillic script had the so-called episemons, graphemes whose sole purpose was the notation of numerals. Therefore, most Glagolitic and Cyrillic numerals are represented by different letters of the alphabet. Furthermore, discerned scribal errors indicate the transposition from Glagolitic numeral system into Cyrillic, and not the other way around. Glagolitic monuments contain much higher number of untranslated Greek words, which indicates that they're the ones preserving the original text of the translation conducted by Constantine. Furthermore, Glagolitic monuments contain many errors in terms of unsuccessfully translated phrases, while such places in Cyrillic monuments have been significantly rectified. The style of the Glagolitic monuments is often unclear and hardly intelligible, sometimes almost completely unintelligible without the Greek original. This should point to their antiquity, the very outset of Slavic literacy, when there was no skill in translation. The relation between the Glagolitic monuments in Moravia and those in the Balkans is best explained by presuming expansion of the Glagolites tradition from Moravia. Before the 10th century, when the Magyar-German wedge separated western from southern Slavicis, Cherny says Rabau's account, in his famous treatise on the letters, written as early as the end of the 9th or beginning of the 10th century. Monk Cherny says Rabau states the following: Prejda ubo Sloveni I maxoke nigensi artami I resumi sitikso I gataraxo pogani sost. KRSDIV shays a sharim sky jimmy IGRC sky jimmy pismani nozda axo pisati slovenesko rek bez ustrojenia, nkako moze pisati dobroji RC sky jimmy pismani bog ili zivit ili jello ili Kentucky ili agenj ili wrote ili ed ili odu ili junos ili EZYKI ina podobnea sim. Idtako bizemno galeta. Earlier the Slavs did not have books but by strokes and notches read and divine, being heathen, and when they were baptized, they had to write the Slavic speech with Roman and Greek letters without design, because how could one write with Greek letters bog, or zivit, or dzello, or cr Kentucky, or kajani, or sirota, or ed, or odu, or junost, or EZYK, or other similar words. And so it was for many years. Rabau's Artami I resume have long puzzled scholars. Various suggestions have been made, ranging to simple wood marks used for aid in counting, to adaptations of Turkic and Germanic runes. However, despite the proximity of Bulgar and Gothic tribes to presumed location of Slavic tribe and Proto-Slavic Heimat, obvious contacts of which have otherwise left clear linguistic traces, not only has no authentic Slavic runic writing been discovered, but it cannot furthermore be shown that Constantine's Glagolitic alphabet contains any runic elements at all. According to Schenker, Rabau's account is most likely to pertain to the possible pre-Constantine usage of Greek and Roman alphabet for writing by the Slavs, which was a very difficult task. The initial letters of the example words he cites are meant to illustrate that the initial consonants in Zivit, Jello, cr Kentucky, Kajani and Sirota were completely absent in the contemporary Byzantine Greek phonology, as well as the initial nasal vowels illustrated by ODU and EZYK. Same is valid for the initial syllable of Junost, which was either or jat in ed, as well as for B and G in bog, which could not be represented by Greek letters beta and gamma, which were pronounced as labial and velar fricatives, respectively. Bulgarian scholar Emil Georgiev is the most vocal supporter of the theory that there was indeed a Greek-based pre-Constantine writing alphabet, out of which Cyrillic developed and of which no extant examples have been preserved. He does not deny that the Glagolitic script was Constantine's creation, but Cyrillic is still the oldest script, according to him, deriving from cursive Greek. Rabau's account further describes how Constantine Cyril was sent by God to Slavs to compose 38 letters, some according to the shape of Greek letters, some according to the Slavic word. This particular statement, as well as some other details, have led some philologists to the conclusion that Rabbah actually speaks about Cyrillic script. However, that theory has been dispelled by the meticulous analysis of St. M. Coleridge Bacon in a study Belescaro re Brevogapology G. The twice-cited number of 38 letters of the Constantine's alphabet Rabbah writes about corresponds to the number of letter in the Glagolitic alphabet, while the early Cyrillic script has many more graphemes. According to I. Gosev, Rabbah mentions another fact that undoubtedly corroborates the Glagolitic character of Constantine's alphabet. Rabbah writes that the first of the alphabet compiled by Constantine the philosopher was God's gift to the Slavs, and by that it was markedly different from pagan Greek alpha. This God's gift is explicable only in terms of Glagolitic A, which represents the cross I. The symbolic invocation with God's blessing. The Russian letters in Vita Constantini, Obrit Ze to Evangelii Psalter Ruskimi Pismani Pisano I Clovica Obrat Glagol Justito Dubesedorju I Besedova Esnim Isilu Resi Prime Svoi Beseed Priklid R Razlignar Pismina Glasnar S Glasnar Ik Bogumolith Vitivor Viskorinas Sesti skazarti, imno ishe emu divligzu, bogarex velest. And he found that the Evangelion Psalter written with Russian letters, and upon finding a man who spoke the language, talked with him, and perceiving the power of the speech, he added various letters for his own language, consonant vocal sounds, and praying to God, immediately began to compose and reveal, and many marveled at him, glorifying God. The phrase Ruskimi Pismani occurring in Vita Constantini 8:15 is another famous and enigmatic statement that has been puzzling to Slavists for a long time, having provoked various and imaginative explanations. According to the Chronicle, Constantine, prior to the setting out, at the request of the Byzantine emperor, on a mission to the Khazars, found in Cherson, at the time a Byzantine outpost in the Crimea, recently repossessed a gospel text and a psalter written in Russian letters. Even though the Crimea in the c. 860 was probably a multi-ethnic community, it is quite unlikely that among the peoples settled there were also Slavs, notably Slavs from the basin of the southern Dnieper, as the Slavs of the Dnieper region were at that period still separated from the northern shores of the Black Sea in the Sea of Azov by the steppe, populated by the Khazars and later also by Pechenegs, the latter remaining heathen until long after the conversion of Rus in 966. Therefore, scholars have generally rejected the connections of the Rus referred here with the Eastern Slavs, with a few highly nationalistic minorities still maintaining a view that Constantine indeed found an old East Slavic text, and that the man he encountered spoke that language. Birnbaum argues that it is highly unlikely that Constantine would have been so very much concerned with the issue whether the Slavs had their own writing system, as reported further in the following chapter 14 of Vita Constantini, had he in fact already found and familiarized himself or otherwise experimented with the Slavic script in the Crimea, while en route to Khazars. According to the hypothesis originally propounded by French slavist André Vaillant, accepted and further developed by distinguished scholars such as Roman Jakobson, Dietrich Gerhardt, Karol Horlek, Robert Orty, Horace G. Lunt and others, Ruskimi stands for the original Surskimi, with a metathesis of the consonants of the first syllable, i.e., Sur and GT, Rus, and thus the original meaning was Syriac being substituted for Russian by the later East Slavic copyist, to whom Syriac here presumably made little sense. It is doubtless that Syrian-speaking people, presumably prevalently merchants, could have resided resided in the Crimea in the late 9th century, especially in the port city of Cherson. Moreover, Syriac was the language of Syrian Christian refugees who had escaped from Arabic Islamic rule and could have made the refuge on Cherson at that time. Therefore, the Syriac hypothesis is generally held to have much arguments on its side, and many accept it even today. According to another theory, the term Russkymi refers in fact to Gothic, the author confusing one Old Germanic language with another. This theory was advocated by Czech-American slavist Francis Dovnik and Polish slavist Tadeusz Splawinski. The chief argument is that Goths had been Christianized much earlier, as early as the 4th century, by the mission of the bishop Wulfila, and that there is doubtless evidence of Gothic presence in the Crimea. The chief argument against this theory is the fact that it is not particularly likely that the Old Scandinavian language of the notoriously pagan Varangians would have been mixed with the language of Christian Arian Goths by a medieval copyist, and that, furthermore, the Arian Goths of the Balkans were in no way identical with the Crimean Goths at the northern shores of the Black Sea, which were very possibly not even converted to Christianity, or at least not in its heretic Arian variety. Therefore, this theory was very soon abandoned in favor of other explanations. Harvey Goldblatt has suggested in his essay on Russkymi Pismani in the Vita Constantini and Rusaran religious patriotism another radical reinterpretation. Goldblatt notes that of all the preserved codices that contain Vita Constantini, the vast majority is East Slavic, and has the reading Russkymi Pismani, while numerically much fewer South Slavic MSS show various alternative readings, Russkymi, and Rozkentucky. Given also the fact that the earliest attestation of this text does not go back further than the 15th century, it cannot be automatically assumed, according to Goldblatt, that they all reflect one uniform and complete text tradition of the Vita Constantini, supposedly written in Moravia before 882. Instead, by considering in particular also the nationalistic ideology expressed by a Russian Church Slavonic text known as the Skazany o Gramot Ruste, a work whose oldest text and copy is found in EMS immediately following that of the Vita Constantini, Goldblatt suggests that, for the lack of information, one cannot advance a conjecture on either the circumstances on textual transmission for the Skazany prior to the 15th century and the precise relations between its textual history and that of Vita Constantini. Yet the Skazany provides the correct context in which to place the Russian episode of the Vita Constantini, precisely because it conveys a message conforming perfectly to the ideological atmosphere of the 15th century Rusaran lands. After the defeat of the Slavs at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389 and the fall of Tarnovo, the Bulgarian capital, in 1393. Thus, the Greek betrayal of orthodoxy, with the loss of Constantinople to Muslim Ottoman Turks in 1453, was suited to reinforce the idea of a religious and cultural transfer from Byzantine and the Slavic Balkans to Muscovy. The notion of Constantine Cyril discovering Russian letters in Chersonev that he would have studied with a Russian in the Crimea would thus be completely acceptable, indeed welcome, in the 15th century Muscovy, grounded on the belief that Moscow was by then the center of the true Orthodox faith. The scenario of events in Cherson would thus become a central component of the new Muscovite ideological outlook. Another recent theory is that by Greek Slavis takios, the author first emphasizes that there is in fact no support for the Syriac hypothesis in the MS tradition, as no single extant text of the Vita Constantini actually has the allegedly correct reading, which is something one would have expected given the many witnesses of this text which have been preserved, and considering the fact that letter transpositoins within a single word were indeed not an uncommon phenomenon in medieval texts. In other words, argues Takiaus, to accept the Syriac theory one has to assume that the Sauer and GT Rouse metathesis must have occurred very early, in the very first antigraph underlying all extant MSS. He thus argues that the Vita Constantini goes back to the original version composed in Moravia immediately after Constantine's death, in order to explain the stay of the brothers in Cherson. Takiaus claims that the Old Church Slavonic verbs obrashti and eskazati were used in the specialized meaning of to receive and to interpret, teach, preach, rather than the common senses of to find and to speak, respectively. Thus the described Cherson episode would mean that Constantine received a gospel text and a psalm and a man, and that he soon began to read it and to preach in it. He further suggests that Constantine, who already knew some Hebrew when he arrived in Cherson, here merely perfected his mastery of that language while learning the very beginnings of the related Samaritan language. As for the mysterious Ruskaimi, Takiris argues that the Constantine's study of Hebrew, Samaritan and the Rus languages, though repeated one after the other, must not be viewed as necessarily having occurred in close time sequence, and hence the Constantine is said to have encountered Slavs among the multi-ethnic population of the Crimea. The Vernadsky does not doubt at all the existence of Rus strongholds on the Crimea in the 9th century, but moreover argues that some of the settlements must have existed in the older period of merger of Rus with Alanic tribes. A troop of Rus is reported to have settled on the Crimea as early as the late 8th century. As around 790 AD the city of Shuros was apparently attacked by the Rus. The life of Saint Stephen of Shuros reports of conversions to Christianity of Rus Niaz who led the siege to the city of Shuros. A certain number of Rus followed his example, so they, having settled on the Crimea, necessarily came under the influence of the neighbors, the Greeks and the Goths. Religious rites, in which the Rus participated, were conducted in Byzantine Greek and Gothic, depending on the locality. It is thus possible that the Rus in a certain period might have wanted and in fact had found their own churches using their own tongue for liturgical ceremonies. Consequently, the translation of the New Testament was a necessity, and it is not impossible that they arranged it, and all that was left of it was a doubtful news in Vita Constantini. As far as the alphabet is concerned, the Vernadsky argues that this Ruskaimi in fact could have referred to an ethnonym as well as on the Aryan word Old Indigroka, shining, radiant, Ruchi, light, luster, Avestan, Raukar, light, especially, heavenly, Old Indigruksa equals Avestan Rarokshna, radiant, and thus it could refer to an enlightened or inspired alphabet. None of the proposed theories is flawless and escapes heavy criticism, and furthermore none enjoys widespread acceptance among Slavists. Thus in a recent study Birnbaum concludes that this therefore is one of the remaining controversial issues of the Cyrillo-Methodian research today, as much as ever.